Hello, welcome to a new spot in my living room. So I was in the midst of filming a Dissertation Diaries video. That was my plan. We're going to go through business as usual, but I realised from explaining what we're doing in the Dissertation Diaries that there's not really a lot of new things that we're doing. It's more or less just the same thing that we've been doing since the start of the Dissertation Diaries, research and outlining. We're still doing that. We're going into the literature review next week, but for now it's research and outlining. So I have a better idea. The aim of the next few days up until Halloween is to find a book so scary that I can't fall asleep. That is what the aim is. However, what's going to come alongside that is just finding some really cool, spooky, scary books. So we're going to be doing that for the next few days instead of filming another Dissertation Diaries. However, next week we will be getting back onto it. So if you're here for the Dissertation Diaries, my apologies. We will be back on it next week though. So it's all good. But this week, for Halloween, we're going to be reading scary books. So I have a little miniature TBR, kind of mostly comprised of audiobooks, because I've rediscovered my passion for audiobooks, and I've also learned how to use audiobooks as an alternative to just listening to music, so I can actually focus on what the audiobook is saying instead of having my mind drift off into other realms, which is good because it means we're going to be getting so much more reading done now that we've discovered this new skill that I've never ever had. So what we're reading this week, we'll start off with the one that I am 47 minutes to the end. I literally have 47 minutes left of this audiobook and I've been so hyped to get to the end of it because so far this book has left me on the edge of my seat at all times, and I'm really looking forward to getting to the end. But the first book that we'll be reading today and finishing today is The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This is a story about a governess who starts working at Bly Manor. We'll explain why that should ring a bell in a second, but she starts working at Bly Manor and then all of a sudden it starts to seem like either Bly Manor is haunted or the children are haunted. That's all I'll say. The Haunting of Bly Manor came out I think last year or the year before. I think it was last year. If you've watched that show and you're thinking that you don't want to go into the book because it's going to be the same and obviously it's not going to have the same effect, there's so much that's been changed between this and the show. One of the major differences is that this I think is set in the 18th, maybe 19th century. I'm pretty sure it was published in the 19th century. It's like it was published either in the late 19th century or the very early 20th century. I do feel like it was late 18th. Yeah, it's going to take me too long to work out from the chronology in this book to when this was exactly published, but I'll put it on the screen when I find out. But this is set in the 19th century at some point in time, but in the show, I'm pretty sure the show is actually set in the 70s. I mean, that is obviously a major difference in itself, but also the plot, the execution of the plot, certain things, the way characters are, the relationship characters have to one another. I think they've added some characters in the show as well that they don't have in the book. They're all different, and I do think that even if you've watched the show, you can read this book and be so taken aback by the things that are happening in here. This book is more scarier than the show itself. So I definitely would recommend reading this. From what I've read so far, like I said, 47 minutes to the end. I'm so excited. But then going along the theme of books that were recently adapted into shows, round about Halloween time, we have The Haunting of Hill House, which is obviously the show The Haunting of Hill House. So this was written by Shirley Jackson. I've read the first two chapters. Shirley Jackson honestly has taken me by surprise with how well she can write. That is not something I was expecting from watching the show, and I don't know why. I was expecting it to be a little bit tackier, but no, Shirley Jackson, fantastic writer. The same with Henry James, actually. Henry James, he takes writing to like a new level. So both of these books, from what I can tell so far, very well written. The Turn of the Screw, terrifying. I don't know much about this yet because I'm only 2 chapters in. I'll be listening to the audiobook after I finish The Turn of the Screw later on today, and I'll hopefully get that done because I don't think it's much longer than The Turn of the Screw. So it's about like 3 hours longer than The Turn of the Screw, which is fine because I do think we could probably get this done over the time that we're trying to read it. So that's The Haunting of Hill House. If you don't know what The Haunting of Hill House is, in the book what I'm getting from it is that is about this man who's trying to study something, psychology, and then he goes to this house that's supposedly haunted, and he takes some professional enthusiasts with him to basically stay at this house and study the effects of staying at a house that is supposedly haunted. So that's what this book is all about. I'm really eager. I'm so eager to get into this. Mostly because of her writing. I was genuinely not expecting what I walked into with Shirley Jackson's writing, but I'm very eager now that I'm here. And then I have one more that I intend to finish by Halloween, and then I have a couple that I'm going to be starting on or around Halloween, but we'll get through those in a second. But we have The Woman in Black by Susan Hill. This, just in case I said The Haunting of Hill House was by Susan Hill, The Haunting of Hill House is by Shirley Jackson, The Woman in Black is by Susan Hill. I have this absolutely beautiful edition of it. I got this kind of on a whim. I was not sure if I wanted to read The Woman in Black because I have watched the film, didn't find the film too engaging, but this cover could not have been abandoned at Waterstones by me. So I'm really eager to get into this. Once again, I'll be listening to the audiobook. This is a 5-hour audiobook, so that could be done within a couple days. I will be trying to get to this after The Haunting of Hill House, but The Haunting of Hill House starts to get a little bit draggy if I'm like taking a bit too long to listen to The Haunting of Hill House. I'll probably intersect it with this just to try and finish this alongside it. So obviously, to begin with, we have 3 very well-known scary movies or scary TV shows. That's how we're starting off the Halloween reading vibes going. I would also like to try and finish Berserk Volume 4, which is not going to be hard. I'm probably going to do this after I finish the audiobook for the Turn of the Screw, because I can get through this really quickly. It's a manga. It's a manga without many words. Obviously mangas are mostly pictures, but this one is beyond mostly pictures. This one just is pictures with a few occasional words. So I'm probably going to try and finish this today. I am 235 pages in. It's a 700 page manga, so we'll be doing this. And then a couple more things. I would like to start Babel. I keep seeing people really enjoy this book. I know the quote. I know the famous quote that everyone keeps posting everywhere. So I know why I'm going to like this even beyond the quote, because Abby from Abbey of Pelennor, we all know who Abbey of Pelennor is on this channel. However, if you're interested, her channel will be linked in the description. She is not a slow-paced reader. She does not like slow-paced books, but she really liked this, and that, beyond the fact that I just trust Abby's recommendations to their core, she really, if she likes a book, it's a good book. That's all I can say about that, because it's just so, she knows a good book. And so if she liked this beyond the fact that it's a slow-paced book, on top of that, this book's going to be fantastic. This book is going to be so up my street. I just need to somehow bring myself to pick it up. It's very daunting. Daunting beyond the fact that it's literally all black and grey, and it's a super thick book. It's also daunting because it is a dark academia, I think, and I've not read much dark academia. And the fact that it's slow paced, and I'm looking for something a little bit fast recently just to get through my TBR. I'm scared. I'm terrified, but I am eager at the same time. So then we have one more book that I'm going to be reading on Halloween as a little 24-hour readathon by myself, because I need to read this book. I need to make a decision whether or not I'm keeping this book or not. So we're going to ignore the fact that all the books that this was stacked on top of, that this was stacked underneath of, have just fallen over, and I'm gonna have to fix that at some point. But Dracula by Bram Stoker. We're just gonna do it. On Halloween, we're gonna do a 24-hour readathon. I have the audiobook. I'm gonna read it alongside it, and I'm just gonna persevere through this book. It's gonna be a nightmare. I am super nervous about getting into this, but once it's done, it's done. And I can decide if it's a good book, if it's a bad book, if I should chuck it, or if I should treasure it and hold it in a special place in my living room where all the other shrines of authors and books that I love are. I see so many nice copies of this as well, and I do think the Penguin Clothbound is quite nice. It's quite atmospheric, but at the same time, because I don't love the book, I'm like, I don't know, I want to buy the nice copies. But I also don't want to buy a nice copy of a book that is so dreadful. So I think it's probably just time that I get through it. I get over my fears and I just persevere through it. We have some scary Halloween books. I am now going to go and sit and finish the Turn of the Screw audiobook, and then I'm going to get some work done for my dissertation. And then I'm probably going to start listening to the audiobook of The Haunting of Hill House. I actually might change that for The Woman in Black, since The Woman in Black is going to be a lot shorter. I think my hand, the universe has spoken. We're going to be listening to The Woman in Black after The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, because apparently this is just literally throwing itself at me. So that is all for this introduction. We are going to go and finish off The Turn of the Screw audiobook now. I'm so looking forward to it. I'm probably going to play some Sims while I do that, and then we'll get on with university work, and we'll see what else happens. So it's now Sunday. I'm hoping to get this vlog up tomorrow night, but I will also finish this vlog tomorrow after I start reading Dracula. But in the past, I guess so many days, however it's been, I've finished 2 books and I'm 40% through another one. So I guess what we're going to do is we're going to talk about them in the order that I finished them. So obviously the first book that I finished on Wednesday or Thursday. I can't remember when I started the vlog. Whenever I said I was going to read this book, I did. I managed to finish The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. It's one that's kind of interesting, because I think that, like, Henry James as a writer, like, the actual writing itself, fantastic. Honestly, so unique. I can definitely see how the Phantom of the Opera took some inspiration from this as well, because the actual narrative style itself was very unique, is just the best way to put it. It's very, like, poetically conversational. I hope that makes sense, because so it starts off with a prologue, which is first person narrative the whole way throughout, but it's 2 different first person narratives. So there's a person who is telling a ghost story, the ghost story being the manuscript, which the book then goes into, and the manuscript of a governess who is obviously went to this house to work and ends up either discovering that the house is haunted or the children are haunted. That's all I'll say about that. But So it is first person narrative, and I think that he does a lot with that, and I do really like what he did technically and like artistically with that. I'm trying not to say too much. While also trying to work out the right words to use. I don't want to say poetic because it's not necessarily poetic, but it is definitely very vivid, very visual, and very, it flows very nicely, and it's very unique, and it's very, very well written. Honestly, that was something that took me a bit by surprise, just from the prologue, because the prologue is something that I really struggled getting into when I first tried to read it, but then going past that, the actual writing itself, beautiful, fantastic. So the story was really well written. It was really well developed. I think that because it's a very short book, so I do think that was like the necessary size for it. A couple things I will say is that, first of all, it seemed like it was kind of leaving off and it was unfinished when I first read it, and that's something that put me off originally, but as days have went past and I've managed to sit and think about this for a little bit longer, I do like it, and I do think that it still works even though it does feel unfinished. Beyond that, the story itself, like the actual horrific, horror, scary part of it, the part where we're supposed to be scared, I do think relies quite heavily on being a contemporary audience. So I do feel like this book is very much suited to its time. I feel like obviously that's not a bad thing, because obviously Henry James wasn't thinking this was going to be a book that was going to last for centuries, or that the audience that was going to be reading this book was going to be this much changed. So like, I don't fault it for that, but for me personally it was something that kind of let me down, and the fact that it was very suited to its time, so it wasn't as scary for a modern audience as it would obviously have been for its contemporary audience. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's quite rational to be, but because I was looking for scary, and because I was looking for something really, really spooky, and really, really, like, I wanted to be kept awake by this book. I didn't do that just because of how much it relies on hints, subtleties, vagueness, and I think that's both because of, like, obviously the social climate. If he was to be a little bit more explicit than that, he would not only terrify his audience but also repulse his audience to such an extent where the book wouldn't sell. But as a modern audience, obviously we've been exposed to too much now for the vague hints, and the atmosphericness of it didn't hit as hard, I think, as if I was reading it in the late 19th, early 20th century. So that's one thing. I think those are like the only things that really let me down by it, but obviously I don't fault it for that. I wouldn't say it's a bad book because of that. I feel like that's quite rational for it to be like that. But yeah, I gave it 4 stars. I really, really enjoyed it. I would really recommend it. I do think that even if you've watched the TV show, the book, radically different. It's honestly, I feel like the only thing they've kept is the place names and certain names, and like the actual like skeleton plot of it, like the governess going to work at Bly Manor, and then obviously the weird things that happen, but everything else so different. And I do think I prefer the ending, despite feeling like it was unfinished at the beginning. I do feel like I actually prefer the ending of this one to the ending of the TV show. I think the TV show is also more based around, you know, maybe kind of like a family, a little bit of a happier kind of thing, where this is just straight up, it's actually horror. It's actually horror, but just not as hard-hitting horror as I would have liked it to be. So that was The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. I then finished the 4th volume of Berserk by Kentaro Miura, or Mira, I think it's Mira, I don't know. I'm really bad at pronouncing names. We all know this, and I'll tell you about this once I change my camera battery. We're back. So I read volume 4 of Berserk. I gave this 4 stars mostly because of and I was taking into consideration the translation, but like mostly because of the communications, and the reason that it bothered me, despite it being translated like with that in mind, is the actual characterization of the characters. That's what made the communications, the talking, or the communication between these characters kind of cringy, and I mean especially in relation to Casca, who is the only woman in the Band of the Hawk, who is obviously the mercenary group that we're following from I think volume 2 till now. I think we're actually about to leave the arc, the Griffith arc. I don't remember what it's called. I research it every time and I look it up every time, but I think that is now done. And so going into volume 5, we should be caught up to where we were in volume 1, which I'm really looking forward to. And there's a few things as well that I feel like we were kind of linking back to the future, and I'm looking forward to seeing how those things tie in. And I'm looking forward to seeing where Gut's character goes. Like, all of those things were fantastically done in this, and I do think that the whole plot itself is very exciting, it's very interesting, it's very, very dark. It is a very disturbing series to read, as I've already mentioned before when I was talking about reading this series, but if you're going to go into this, please look up content notes, because there is not a single content note that would not be on that list. Like, it literally covers every violent, horrific act of humanity that can be done on another human. It's so violent. It's so violent. So I am definitely going to continue on with the series. I am really enjoying it. I'm looking forward to seeing what we found out in volume 4, and now that we're at the end of the Griffith arc, I'm looking forward to seeing how that ties into the future volumes, if it does, and hopefully it will, because I do think that that would be kind of necessary at this point, because we did get a lot of backstory for Guts, and it'd be kind of sad if it was not followed up on. So I'm looking forward to volume 5. I'm probably not going to pick up anything soon, just because this one was a bit of a letdown, and I kind of wanted to settle for a bit before I pick up volume 5 with the little to none expectations I have for it. But so those are the 2 books that I've finished, and after I finished the Turn of the Screw, I actually did start the audiobook for The Woman in Black. I am roughly about 40% through this. I have 3 hours left of the audiobook, which I'm going to start listening to after I film this clip while I tidy up. Obviously it's not going to take me 3 hours to tidy up, I hope, but I will be doing some other things today, which means I could probably actually finish this audiobook today, and providing that I do that, I'm going to be listening to the audiobook for Dracula. I feel like this must have been inspired somehow by The Turn of the Screw, which I feel like might be quite an obvious statement to make, because now that I've read The Turn of the Screw, I can see how it's inspired quite a lot of things, including The Haunting of Hill House, including the Phantom of the Opera. So like, I feel like that might have been an obvious statement to make, but I haven't really read it anywhere, so like I don't know for sure or for definite this was inspired by The Turn of the Screw. But one thing I will say about The Woman in Black in relation to The Turn of the Screw, because this was written in 1983, or it was published in 1983 or 1987, obviously it is written and geared towards a more modern audience, or an audience that we will be more familiar with. So I will say that what The Turn of the Screw lacked in terms of horror, this does not. And I am actually listening to the audiobook. That's another thing actually. The audiobook for The Turn of the Screw was fantastic. I can't remember who did the narration for it. I'll put her name on the screen, but she did a fantastic job at narrating this. It was so good. And the audiobook for this one is even better. This probably will put a lot of people off, but it doesn't put me off. In fact, it just made me more eager to, it just is making me more eager to get on with it. But it's narrated by Papa Isedu. He said at the beginning of the audiobook, and I almost conquered the pronunciation of it, but like it's gone now. It's gone. His name will also be up on the screen, but he is doing a fantastic job, first of all. Second of all, there is sound effects and music and like a lot of tension and atmosphere that was kind of added into the sound of this audiobook, and I'm absolutely in love and obsessed with it. It's so good. It's so immersive, and it's definitely one that's actually terrifying me. I actually was struggling to sleep last night after reading this. This has given me what I wanted for Halloween. So I am definitely enjoying this. I'm looking forward to finishing it. It's a very intense story. It's one that also kind of relies on atmosphere and subtle hints at the beginning, but I do see it getting a bit more graphic and a bit more detailed in terms of like the atmosphere, the horror, the paranormal aspects of it. It's going to be so good. I've got so much hopes for it. I feel like I've got too many expectations for this now, but I also don't feel like it's going to disappoint me. So I'm really looking forward to finishing this. I have roughly like 3 hours and like 40 minutes maybe, but I am loving it. I'm enjoying it so much. So now that I've updated you, I'm gonna go and do some tidying up. I'll probably put my audiobook on. I might actually put some music on beforehand just to get myself into the flow of tidying, because there's a lot to do because we've been out for the past couple days. Once I've done that, I'm gonna finish The Woman in Black, and I will hopefully try and start Dracula today. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna shift The Haunting of Hill House to November instead of this month, just so I'm not squeezing everything into tomorrow. And I do want to try and prioritize Dracula, because it's a read that I need to finish by the end of the year in order for me to tell if it's worth keeping or not, because I really need to stop putting this on TBRs. So I will see you tomorrow before I end this vlog for the little miniature readathon that we've done, and I'm going to go get some housework done now. It is now Halloween. It's more or less Halloween night because it is 20 to 5. I'm about to sit down and try and edit this vlog and get it up for 8 o'clock tonight, but we'll see how that works out as we go on. But however, I have finally finished the audiobook for The Woman in White by Susan Hill. The audiobook was narrated by, I'm not going to butcher the pronunciation of his name the second time, so I'll just put it on the screen, but this was a fantastic audiobook. I was left speechless at the end of this. I cannot believe the experience I had while listening to the audiobook of this book. The book itself, fantastic, really well written. I think that Susan Hill has really captured the essence of terror and horror, and that whole haunted house kind of a haunted village, I guess, aspect, trope. I think she did a really good job with that. It was definitely scary on its own. However, the audiobook itself is what I think was most captivating about it. I was so blown away at the end of that audiobook. The audiobook had sound effects and music, and the narrator himself was just so there's just so much effort and emotion and a lot of things went into it, and it really did create a very terrifying, spooky, horrific atmosphere. I would definitely recommend both the book and also the audiobook. Again, can't remember the audiobook narrator's name, but it is an Audible original, and it's like an Audible 3D Audible, something like that. But I really want to listen to more audiobooks by that narrator. And I also want to listen to more audiobooks with that whole production, because it really just amplified this experience. I have no words to put to what I've just experienced this morning when I was finishing off this audiobook. But I gave the book 5 stars on Audible. I gave both the performance and the overall rating 5 stars because I'm so blown away by the whole thing. This is definitely one of my favourites of the year, and I'll be talking about more of this at the end of the year when I do my little 2022 favourites video, and hopefully by that point I'll have more thought out thoughts to give to you about this book. But overall, fantastic. Definitely would recommend the audiobook, specifically that audiobook. If you're going to read this, it definitely just does so much for the entire experience of the book, and I do think this is a book that is best experienced in that level. The film, very different. The film was very cheesy, I feel like, and this was not cheesy. This was horrific. This was terrifying, and it definitely fulfilled everything it promised. So 5 stars to The Woman in Black by Susan Hill. We are nearing the end of Halloween, and I had plans on finishing Dracula by Bram Stoker, and I will say now that I'm on chapter I think 3 or 4, maybe 5, I think I'm on chapter 5, but I think what's benefiting me in reading this book is the fact that I've already watched the BBC adaptation, which was like a modernised Dracula. It's a bit of a weird one. It kind of starts off as like the original Dracula and then turns into, I mean, a modern Dracula, like Dracula in the modern day. It's very difficult to explain, but because I've watched that, I'm reading this and I'm kind of flowing with it a bit differently. But I do think that this is a very just not a great book. I'm going to keep reading it, and I do think that by the end of it I'm not going to hate it. I just think it's a very mediocre book. I definitely think that as I am 4 chapters in, 4 or 5 chapters, I'm also listening to the audiobook of this one as well. I do feel like this is it's an overrated book. Maybe I'll change my mind at the end of it. This looks thick, but it's a Penguin Clothman classic, so it's got a ton of notes, secondary reading, further reading. I'm pretty sure there's a glossary. Needless to say, what I'm trying to get at is it's not a very thick book. The audiobook is like 15 hours and I'm like an hour in. So I'm going to keep reading it. I'm going to try and finish it by the end of the year, but I do think this is going to be just not a book that I'm going to love. It's unfortunately, it just sounds so up my street. I really love gothic romanticism. I really love classic monster stories. I really love classics, but this is a very mediocre book. I honestly do not get the hype for it. I mean, I get like the whole legends of vampires, and that's probably why. But there's so many other vampire stories, and yet this is the one that we hold so much treasure to. But maybe I'll change my mind at the end of it. I don't think so though. I really, really think this is just bland. It's just so bland. It's as bland as Dracula's diet. One that I'm kind of more interested in, one that I'm kind of having a better time with but not loving the audiobook too much, is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I'm pretty sure I'm 5 chapters into this one as well. This one's a much shorter audiobook. It's 5 hours and I think I've got 3 hours left, so I'll probably actually end up finishing this one by the end of tonight instead of Dracula, because this is a lot more interesting than Dracula. This is another more recent, recently published book. I'm trying to remember. I feel like it was the 50s or the 60s. It was 1959 when it was published, so I was very close. Again, another one kind of interesting to place in like the timeline of horror, from like The Turn of the Screw to The Woman in Black. This one obviously landing somewhat in the middle, obviously leaning more towards The Woman in Black. What I think is interesting about this one is it's a little bit more, it does kind of focus a little bit more on the individual people, at least so far. Probably because we're introducing, but from what I remember of the show as well, it was very focused on the individual people who had the experience, whereas The Woman in Black was more focused on the actual experience itself, if that makes sense. I think I'll have more to say and more developed thoughts when I talk about it in my wrap up later on in the year. So I think I'm going to like this one. I think this one's probably going to be another 4 stars, and I am going to finish this one today. So that is the end of this vlog. We're obviously on Halloween night. I'm going to edit the vlog right now, try and finish it, and afterwards I'm going to try and finish The Haunting of Hill House. But thank you so much for watching this video. If you have made it this far in the video, I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed it, let me know by liking it, and if you have any scary books that you've read recently, any Halloweeny, spooky, seasonal books, whether they be Halloween seasonal or just autumn seasonal, let me know in the comments. I would really love some recommendations and to know where else I can go for like really, really scary books. If you've read The Woman in Black, let me know your thoughts as well in the comments. If you want more content from me, make sure you subscribe to my channel, and that is all for this video, and I'll see you soon for another one.